Thank you very much for participating despite your busy schedule for participating in the Climate Change Adaptation Book Publication Commemorative Symposium. So we would like to start the symposium. To begin with, the representative, Mr. Ito, will give you a few remarks. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for participating in this Climate Change Adaptation Book Publication Commemorative Symposium. So I'm the leader, the Tetsuji Ito, the Ibaraki University. It is very nice to meet you, organizers of the international workshop. So this symposium commemorates the forthcoming publication of the Interlocal Adaptation to Climate Change in East and Southeast Asia, sharing lessons of agriculture, disaster risk reduction, and resource management. Sharing lessons of agriculture, disaster risk reduction, and resource management. So this book is written in English to tell the truth, and it was ideal that we would like to disclose the information of the book, and it'll take a little bit of time to be published. So the publication company disclosure, which can be browsed through the internet. The authors of this book are the researchers. The many researchers are participating in the symposium, not only from Japan, but Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and China. So they're all researchers. So all of whom have different areas of the expertise, but work together in an interdisciplinary manner and a part of the network of the researchers that we have been building for more than 3 years. So we are comrades. The objectives of the books are as follows. Firstly, to promote interlocal wisdom gained through the shared adaptation to climate changes. So what is the interlocal, the word means? Maybe it's not familiar to you, so it is linking between one area to the other for the adaptation to address various kinds of problems and learn with each other. And then the new wisdom will be merged. Secondly, to develop new adaptation strategies and research approaches that take into account the regional characteristics of the East and Southeast Asia. And thirdly, to share the practical adaptation opinions that are prevalent in the societies of each country and regions. How to disseminate the information in the society so that permeate the information, which means the social implementation is well used, but I think so we would like to go into, penetrate into various kinds of the people. So the penetration is really important, I think. As is well known, the Asia is one of the most vulnerable regions to the impact of the climate change, with more than 60% of the world's other people living in the region. So making it a center of the global growth, the Asia is vast and includes many different countries and regions. So it just only the part of the area had been covered by this book. But we have various kinds of location there. So we have the in-depth analysis of these areas. So when it comes to the term climate change, may be inadequate to describe the contemporary global situation. Instead, the term climate crisis may provide a more comprehensive description. So this crisis will not only change the natural environment, but will also affect the social environment and have a profound impact on our culture and customs. So what should we do? More importantly, what can we do? So no one individual has much power, but there are things we can do. So we are researchers, so we can make connections across countries and disciplines. So the publication of this book is one of the opportunities for us to share our wisdom and how to deal with the drastic changes. So from yesterday to today, so we carried out the international workshop. The international workshop has been closed just before, but we have the results, a good accomplishment. I myself, I think they closed the countries and the disciplines and areas. And you see, so various kinds of people engaged in this international workshop, including the children. So as for myself, the junior high school students were asked out of my perspectives, and they made a wonderful presentation in Japanese, so we can have a dialogue. I think the crossing the generations and the various kinds of fields. So not only the fields and the countries, and we have to cross the generation to construct the diversified societies. So when we're facing with the dilemma, so these kind of elements would be the key to tackle with the obstacles. And of course, the publication of this book will be one of the opportunity to address the drastic change of the environment, and we have to share the wisdom. You see, I have 4 children. So 2 of them were already adults. So when 2 of them were children, so we had a peach tree in our gardens, and all of the peach trees have been cut down. So we felt deep sorrow. At the moment, one of my son is a university student. So that peach tree was so-called the commemorative tree, which was planted when one of the son is born. So I wanted to say, so I don't like to be a tree cutters, but I would like to be a tree planters. I'm not sure the wasteful materials, but planting the tree will be really important. So this is one of the observations that I have. You can see the big tree, so which is in the Mito campus of the camphor tree in Ibaraki, the university. So with the focusing lens, so these kind of trees will make us affluent, and we can cope up with the problem of the climate change. Today, the dear participants, so they're commemorating, I think, the climate change adaptation book. Why don't we have a discussion together? Thank you very much for your cooperation, everybody. So next, I would like to introduce the books. So the Associate Professor, Mr. Tamla, will introduce you the book. Thank you very much for your introduction. So my name is Tamura. Please wait for a moment. Can you see the screen? So again, so I am Tamura of the Ibaraki University. So I'm also in charge of the climate change project, and I'm in the Hanoi with the Vietnam to Japan University. So I myself are tackling this problem both in Japan and Vietnam doing the research. So before talking about the climate change adaptation book, I'd like to make a confirmation. As you already knew, the climate change is evident, it's obvious. Last month, the IPCC's the 6th report had been published. So the average temperature in the world in the 19th, comparing to the 19th century, it's 1.07 degrees Celsius up. So the reason was due to the human beings' activities. So this is obvious and doubtful, the result. So in the past, the researchers and the scientists, they're not sure, and they're really, I think, the prudent for saying these things because the climate change had been caused due to the human beings' activities.
So they clearly declare that there's no doubt that human activity ever contributed to the global warming. And for example, so this is the temperature distribution. When we say climate change, and there are a lot of definitions, for example, and global warming is one definition of climate change, but for example, I'm gonna explain later that, for example, precipitations is the other impacts. For example, and one of them is when it comes to precipitation. Now, we think that it's very likely that heavy precipitation events will intensify and become more frequent in most regions. So this is a very simple chart, but this is the greenhouse gas emissions due to human activity. It will lead to the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. And right-hand side, and this graphics represents about 280 ppm at the end of the 19th century, but now it's about to go over 400 ppm. That means that more than 4 times as matches greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, and that also adversely affected a lot of environments. And for example, our countermeasures, there are major 2 directions. For one thing is mitigation. The other direction is the adaptation. So these are the two pillars of countermeasures. And in conclusion, and put in another word, that we need both the mitigation and adaptation. So this is that and when it comes to climate change, that is just a norm. For example, let me explain about this. Now you're looking at the graphics, in which after 1950 and the total emission of CO2, this is on, that's the axis X, and axis Y represents about the change of this and the temperature, and the black parts, this is about the historical global warming. So it seems like that's in really strong correlation between the global surface temperatures and also for the cumulative carbon emissions. So going along well with the graphics, now it might be quite likely that the temperature will go up, keep going up. So that's why. And now we have a Paris Agreement and globally, so that in order to suppress the CO2 emissions, and before that, the temperature and the rising up to the certain level, for example, and about 3,500 gigaton of CO2 should be removed from this future emission. But now, so far, now we have about 2,390 gigaton of CO2 have already been have been gassed out. So in the next 100, about or 80 years, for that 1,800, the gigatons can be emitted. So that means that, and divided by 80, about 14 gigaton can be intolerable. So that means that now we have a 32 to 35 gigaton of CO2 is now being emitted. So we have to cut down to that more than half of the current emission level. Otherwise, we cannot achieve the target, and we have to suffer from the further temperature rising. So that's why we must take in mitigation measures, but at the same time, but it takes a very long time that the mitigation measures will actually take effect. So by then, we already have accumulated the CO2 that emitted so far in the past. So for the time being, and we cannot help having that impacts of the climate change. So that's why we needed to have the adaptations. Now, I'm sorry that I mentioned about a bit of long preface, but now based on these and the sense of crisis, we have compiled, and particularly for the East and the Southeast Asia's perspective, we have worked together with the researchers in East and South Asia. We have compiled this book. In this book, we have 10 chapters, and also for the 35 and authors have compiled this book, and that have to be on the time today, but now the publishing work is just a little bit postponed, so that actually the book will come up on available the next month, so that this is the free of charge. And we're going to give you the URL so you can easily download from the URL. Also, Professor Ito had mentioned earlier, the research networks and the group have we share several sense of a crisis, or for example, in this climate change is really diversified and also very serious. So therefore, climate adaptation should be conducted taking into consideration and each local and regional conditions, and we need to have a local relevance. So with a lot of activities so far have been taken, but we're afraid this have not been enough. And we are the researchers, but adaptation from the researchers' perspective and the actual actions taken by the community, the citizens in the community, we discover sometimes the gap between the two, so that we have to fill out the gap between the researcher's point of view and an actual practice by the community citizens. So we need to bridge this gap. And now you're looking at this. Also, I'm going into the details that I mentioned earlier, that I think that first of all, we need to take a scientific approach, but at the same time, we need to have a regional, local relevance, so that we need to also consider regional approach. And then when it comes to the scientific approach, it's sort of a top-down like approach. So first we come up with the climate model and make a predictions, a project, and the countermeasures and the adaptation plan should be formulated. On the other hand, just like shown on the right-hand side, this is the regional approach. This means sort of and the bottom-up type of the approaches, and starting from that actual some of the specific problem already have conspicuous that comes out in the field. So that's why, and we needed to take some countermeasures as soon as possible. So sometimes I mentioned earlier that there's some kind of gap, and we have to bridge between these two, and I mean that the gap between the scientific approach and the regional approach. And one of the actions we have to take is that interlocal lessons and should be shared with each other, and also here in the reference case in Japan. And now this is the Climate Change Adaptation Center, like the organization should be workable. Also, Professor Ito had mentioned that we have started the projects since about 4 years ago, and a couple of Philippines or Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, China, and Japan. These are, we have organized a lot of workshops, and but we're to our disappointment that we have to do this kind of a symposium or the workshop on online, because due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But now we can share that's what the problems are there and what should we do. We have tons of good discussions since then. Now these are that. And would you please make reference to the actual and the books and for the details? But let me just take some example, some typical example of efforts. So let me take the two major topics. First one is that the agriculture, the other is a disaster, and also resource management or the development of resource management. They are the areas and topic we covered. So it does not include here in this slide, but the resource management, we mean that, for example, the and resource management in terms of the natural resources or the human resources. So the natural resources and whether human resources, that's also the part of the definition of resource management. But anyway, there are a lot of researchers from the many couple of countries have just offered a lot of actual reference cases, and I try to analyze and also know for you. This is now you're looking at the example of the flooding in the Philippines, and also about how that the decision-making tools have been developed, and just shown below that you're gonna now looking at that in the islands in the Indonesia and the small coastal island management, particularly for that's the coastal area preservations in Indonesia.
So the countermeasure for the agricultural problem for the management of the water resources, and we're using the ITC resources for the participatory the method, the participatory learning and mutual dialogue. When it comes to the Philippines examples, the Purin sensei would like to give an explanation, so we would like to skip this issue. How about Japan? So in Japan, so there is in education of the disaster. So this is for the Tohoku region in the northern part of Japan, the disaster prevention activities. And so there's also another activities which is called the My Timeline, and using the tools. As I mentioned before that, so these are the some examples, and of course there are other examples. So in the book, so many examples are indicated due to the restriction of the time. So we cannot, talk about all of these things. So one of these are the agriculture and the natural resource management, and also the disaster risk reduction and the human resource development. So impact adaptations are indicated. So what the kind of countermeasures we can take and what kind of influence there will be. So due to the constraints of the time, and I'd like to touch upon the examples in Japan. So in 2018, so there is so-called the Climate Change Adaptation Act enacted. As I mentioned earlier, the science, we are filling the gap between the science and the community. So these are the activities. So this is the activities that I've involved in. The Ibaraki, the university is also involved in the Ibaraki, the local climate change adaptation center, which was inaugurated in 2019. So this Ibaraki local climate change adaptation the center, in many cases, local municipalities or the local research institutes will establish these kind of centers, but this is a rare example that the university was the founders. And at that time, so we were the forerunner for establishing this local climate change adaptation the center. This is a rare examples. So these are the examples which are shown. For example, in terms of the agriculture, so for the incidence of the chalky rice or the kernels of the koshihikari, which is one of the kinds of the rice, and also the forecast of the crops. So how we can make the scientific the forecast. And then take a look at the left-hand side. So the community people are participating, do various kinds of the meetings, learning that climate change will affect the daily activities. So this is the final the slide. So there's so many examples written on the book, but this is a summary of the lessons. Firstly, the climate change is obvious, and it's undoubtful of the fact. And of course, at the same time, there's so many people are adapting to the climate change. But furthermore, we have to tackle with the so-called the climate risks and need to adapt to the future risk at the same time. So they are various kinds of approach. One is the scientific approach, and another one is the regional approach, I mean the local approach. So there are two ways to adapt in the climate change. So in order to fill the gap, so there are some indications. So one of them is that, see, the stakeholders' involvement and the collaboration with the national and the local institutions are required for adaptations. The national institutions and also the local institutions, there are various kinds of levels of the institutions, but so the collaboration, both the vertically and the horizontally, so at the same time, would be needed for the adaptation of the climate change. So among these changes, the participatory approach and also the community-based countermeasures should be taken. The morning, so various kinds of examples that were raised. Education for the local people and for the local children would also be the intermediary tools for understanding the problem. And we have to take up the local voice for the countermeasures. So coming back to the first theme. So the local and indigenous knowledge should be leveraged. And so many the examples should be enhanced interlocally. And of course, various kinds of discussion would be enhanced in the future. Thank you very much for your attention, everybody. So next, the president of the Ibaraki University, Mr. Ota, will give you some few remarks. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for participating in the Climate Change Adaptation book. So this is open access, and most of the presentation we carried out in English. And we will have a big and good results. Today, we have good news. The Nikkei newspaper covers this article. Can you see this article? For decarbonization, the university researchers are gathering. So this kind of general meeting, it had been they gathered on the April 22nd. But of course, the theme was the carbon neutral. So the university in all parts of the Japan gathered in the meetings. So, and a lot about of the articles. So they are giving an utmost effort to tackle this problem. So major university names have been indicated. So on the left, the top, the Ibaraki University was indicated with the logo of the university. So as for the National University, the Kyushu, the Mie, and also the local, the agricultural universities are included. But the Ibaraki, the university, came first. They probably, the GLEC and other institutes, they contributed a lot to tackling with this the problem. And when it comes to the publication of the books, so it can be applied to various kinds of the areas, not only in our university, but it can be applied to other universities. We are collaborating with universities in Asian countries. So this is so-called the tipping point. I mean the milestone to further enhance the taking the countermeasure of the climate change. So since we are facing the big problems, so I think this will be a good opportunity to tackle this problem. So again, the research and dialogues would be enhanced. So I would like to close my remarks and congratulations and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. The president of the Ibaraki University is the president. The next, the commemorative speech of the Philippine Los Baños of Philippines. So Mr. Pohin is the leader of the IPCC, which is involved in the climate change of the Southeast Asian countries. So he is one of the leaders. Professor Pulhin will give you the lecture. So if you please, Mr. Pulhin, if you please, thank you very much.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry that I have to speak in English for my presentation this afternoon. The title of my presentation is do you see my screen? Let me share it again. Yeah. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The title of my presentation is Advancing Climate Change Adaptation in East and Southeast Asia, Insights from Recent Reviews. I'm really responding to the question, what happens next? After the 3 years of very successful Southeast Asian research-based network on climate change science, what should be our next steps? And in this presentation, I will be drawing from some recent materials which are synthesis in nature in order to probably drawing also from our own experience from this research network that we have participated on over the last 3 years and distilling some lessons so that we can move forward probably in terms of the next step that we can pursue as a network in order to advance climate change adaptation in East and Southeast Asia. So this is the outline of my presentation, brief background of context of East and Southeast Asia. Key concepts on adaptation will be useful. I'll just go very quickly on it. The findings from the recent reviews that was actually conducted under the Global Adaptation Mapping Initiatives, as well as ways forward, and a last slide is on take-home message. I particularly choose the East and Southeast Asia because this is where our collaborative adaptation network really emanates. So based on UN JU scheme, it involves 18 Asian countries with a total land area of 16 million square kilometers approximately. And physiographically, it is actually rich in natural resources and biodiversity. It's actually home to 4 of the 7 most megadiverse countries of the world, including China, of course, Indonesia, Malaysia, and my own country, the Philippines. In terms of population in East and Southeast Asia, the East and Southeast Asia constitute 51% of the total Asian population, which is the total currently at 4.6 billion as of 2019. And of course, the rest of Asia is around 2.27 billion. We look also at the Human Development Index, and out of the 16 Southeast Asia and East Asian countries are actually below the average Asia Human Development Index of 0.74142, and that includes my own country, Philippines, but up on the average are Hong Kong, Japan, of course, Korea, Brunei, and also Malaysia and Singapore, but the rest actually are below the average Asian Human Development Index, and this has implication in terms of the adaptive capacity of these different countries. We look at the number of disasters in Asia, and we have the record from the emergency event database, which is a global research database based at the Center for Research and Epidemiology of Disaster, that is based in Brussels, Belgium. And actually, we can see in her that the hydrometeorological disasters, which actually concerns with the changing weather and climate, has increased significantly through time. Essentially, when we talk about different disasters, those that are in the database, those that are climatological in nature, including meteorological, which is again related to climate, hydrological, and of course, geophysical is not related to the changing climate. But if I go back on the previous slide, we can see here the dominance of hydrometeorological related types of disasters, which is actually associated with the changing climate. So in here, in terms of percentage of number of disasters that had happened from the last 30 years or so, or 40 years or so, the total East and Southeast Asian disasters account for 60% of the total disasters in Asia. And as I've said, majority of these are actually climate related in nature. We are saying also that climate related risk in Asia will continue to increase in the future, as indicated also in the last IPCC report of 2014, the fifth assessment report. Of important concerns are flood, heat, and drought. So increased flood damage to infrastructure is anticipated, particularly influencing livelihoods and settlements. And of course, this is very much evident in my country, in Japan, and in Indonesia, which is countries participating in this particular network, including Japan itself. Heat-related human mortality is anticipated to increase over time, and also increase drought-related water and food shortage. Even this is very consistent with the current assessment, the new assessment on agriculture that is forthcoming in the sixth assessment report that will be coming out several months from now. So let me go very quickly in terms of refreshing you of the concept of adaptation, because this is central in my presentation. Of course, when we talk about adaptation, this is one of the responses to climate change, as articulated already by Tamura-san. One is mitigation and adaptation, and of course, we have to combine mitigation with adaptation. But our network, of course, focuses on adaptation, because that's something that we can really do significantly, especially in the context of Southeast Asian countries, having contributed not much in terms of mitigation. So essentially, when we talk about adaptation, it's the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate and its effects. And in the human systems, it seeks to moderate or avoid harm. But at the same time, we can also, through adaptation, exploit beneficial opportunities, because climate change, while it has produced, or it will continue to produce adverse impacts, but it is also possible to exploit possible beneficial opportunities associated with it. In some natural systems, such as forests, coastal areas, and so on, human interventions may facilitate adjustment to expected climate and its effects. So humans can intervene, and they can actually enhance adaptations in natural system, probably using science and technology. So I want to highlight the concept of adaptation limit, and the point of which this is the point at which an actor's objectives or system's needs cannot be secured from intolerable risk through adaptive actions. We are saying that there is actually limit to what adaptation can do. And there are two types of limits in the recent assessment: the so-called soft limit, where options are currently not available to avoid intolerable risk through adaptive action, but they may still be available in the future. However, when we talk about the so-called hard limit, that means that no adaptive actions are possible anymore to avoid intolerable limits. And of course, we don't want to reach hard limits as far as adaptation is concerned. No? This is a major challenge now, both in terms of research and in practice of adaptation. So related to the limits of adaptation is the so-called adaptation constraints, which are factors that make it harder to plan and implement adaptation actions. And they are also referred to as obstacles or barriers to adaptation. So categories of obstacles or barriers or constraints to adaptation include economic, limited resources, financial resources to fund adaptation is one of example of this. Governance, failure of institutions to catalyze adaptation measures. Human capacity, limited capacity of human beings to adapt. Of course, policy and institutions, financial, limited information can also constrain adaptation practices. Technological barriers or limitations, as well as physical and biological. But again, talking about constraints, our objective is that we will not reach the threshold or limit, particularly the hard limits to adaptations, where nothing can almost be done in order to avoid risks. I'm drawing basically, as I've mentioned, from the recent assessment. One is still forthcoming. This involved an assessment of 448,000 literature, and they use various methodologies and also machine learning to reduce it not only to a manageable level, but to a level that can be effectively assessed. And so at the end, they were able to assess 1,682 articles all over the world that talks about human adaptations, covering, I think, the period of 2013 to 2019. And this is still forthcoming. This has not been published yet, but the second one is still part of the global adaptation mapping initiatives, is on global evidence of constraints and limits to adaptation. And this is, I think, based on the same database. And here are the key findings. Food poverty and health are among the top sectors addressed in the literature as far as adaptation in Asian contexts are concerned. So adaptations in terms of food, agriculture, and so on, adaptation in terms of health, as well as adaptation in terms of poverty. No? In terms of hazards associated to adaptation, meaning to say the hazards that many literature are trying to address in Asian context. So drought, top the list together with general climate change. This is what is stipulated in the assessed number of literature, precipitation variability also came out very strongly, as well as flooding and also heat. Again, this is very much consistent with the projection of the IPCC in terms of heat, flood, and also essentially the precipitation, the problem of flooding and so on, and drought as well. In terms of actors to adaptation, individuals or households, local and national governments are the major actors that has been documented in the literature. And the challenge really is the engagement of the private sector, which has received very limited effort in the recent adaptation literature. Let me go very quickly in terms of types of adaptation that were documented. And again, in Asia, the dominant types of adaptation are behavioral, meaning human behaviors like, let's say, biking, shifting in terms of lifestyle and so on, as well as technological. These are the top types of adaptation in Asia based on the percentages of articles mentioning each type. And nature-based and institutional adaptations recorded the lowest percentage in terms of the articles focusing on this. And of course, this has some implications because again, the nature-based solutions offer a very important potential as far as the Southeast Asian countries are concerned, as well as in many parts of the world, in order to address the challenge of climate change. Another interesting finding is the fact that the extent, they call it the extent of adaptation, and they use a very important metrics here in terms of depth, how they were able to, the depth or penetration of adaptation, the scope, the breadth, meaning what is covered and so on, the speed, meaning to say once you adapt now, then how quick is the positive result, as well as the limits. And so on the basis of this combination, they came up with the metrics of overall extent of adaptation. And the major findings is that in Asia, it is low for all sectors that were analyzed, ranging from those that concerns the cities, those that concern food, agriculture, health, oceans, poverty, terrestrial, and even water. The extent of adaptation is really still very low, which means that adaptation is largely still localized, no? And consistent with the small adjustment or business as usual, meaning to say we are still just on the coping stage, not really adapting strategically so that we can really minimize risks. Coordination and mainstreaming is this other highlight in the assessment, are limited and is still very, very fragmented, and therefore should receive certain focus probably in the next several years or 10 years as far as effort to adaptation is concerned. There is also these findings that small islands, Asia, Africa, and Central and South America, particularly the developing countries in Asia, have a higher share of studies that identify constraints and both hard and soft limits to adaptation. And these particular findings supported the fact that adaptation faces more challenges in developing world context compared to the developed ones. And I would suppose that this is associated not only with the exposure of developing countries, but also because of their low adaptive capacity, which determines the vulnerability of many of the countries from the developing world, including my own country. Ecosystem-based technological and infrastructural adaptation responses are also already identified as facing both soft and hard limits. And this finding is very, very critical in as much as a combination of these responses is often viewed as the silver bullet or very important thing that can solve or prevent the most severe impacts of climate change. Yet many of these adaptation responses are already identified, or some of them are already identified to be approaching both soft and hard limits. So what then are the ways forward based on these distillations, but also based on my 3 years of very productive collaboration under this particular network and on the basis of this recent review, synthesis of adaptation reviews all over the world. And so I have 4 points that I want to highlight as probably the ways forwards towards our network. One is to conduct or continue to conduct collaborative action research in East and Southeast Asia, particularly on the following, or to achieve the following. One is to co-develop and apply appropriate tools to assess the effectiveness of present and future adaptation responses in reducing climate change. So I think collaboratively, we can collaborate on this. What are some of the more appropriate tools to really determine which one is working and which one is not? Second to that is a better understanding of the limits and constraints to adaptation. So this can also be the focus of our collaborative research. What are the limits and constraints to adaptations or barriers, but also the limit, so that we can comprehensively assess it and to determine whether adaptation response are really adequate to address climate change. Of course, literature will indicate that mitigation is very, very important and has to be complemented with adaptation. But at the same time, we also need to determine the limits and constraints of what adaptation can do in terms of addressing the risks associated with climate. Second point is we need to continue to empower individuals, and this is where action research will come in, households as well as institutions, to enhance adaptation. So there is a challenge to continue to strengthen science policy action interlinks, to work with adaptation champions across scales. So we work with champions in universities, in local government units, in local communities, and so on, so that we can have greater impacts. To highlight the potential of individuals on adaptations, we cannot always rely. Of course, institutions are of paramount importance, but it's what is so-called all government, all societal approach to adaptation is also necessary, and to highlight the fact that we can do individually as well. We can contribute and also tap the participation of the private sector as well, no? Which is the missing link at the moment as far as adaptation is involved. The third way forward is to enhance the sharing and learning of climate change adaptation. Number one, we have been doing this and we should continue to do it by organizing adaptation conferences and workshops. And of course, I want to congratulate the network, led of course by Ibaraki University, for really engaging us and the rest of the different stakeholders in this learning event. Joint publications such as the book and probably joint articles would be very useful to continue to enhance our learning and sharing. Cross-country and site visits is also important, as well as visiting faculty or researcher program. Let's say, and of course, Japan and Vietnam is already doing it, but probably we can do more and also involve the other countries such as Philippines and Indonesia, and of course, in collaboration with Vietnam and Japan. The last one that I want to emphasize is a continuing capacity development on climate change adaptation for younger generation. And again, Ibaraki University, I want to congratulate you for your effort to involving high school students in this conference and so on, because really the brunt of climate change will be felt more by the younger generations and also the future generation. And therefore, capacity development should equally focus on this generation. So training and research mentorships of young professionals will be valuable. Student internships in other schools and university, exposures even to high school students and so on, organization of student colloquia where students share lessons and so on, supporting adaptation action programs of the youth. So youth clubs on adaptations can be encouraged, and also providing support for them, and mainstreaming adaptation in elementary and high school curricula. And my final stage, my final slide is what I call here as the take-home message. I argue that climate change adversely impacts on different sectors in Asia that forces individuals, households, and communities, or even institutions to adapt. And in fact, there are efforts towards adaptations that has been adequately documented in the literature as well as in the recent reviews. Despite this, current adaptation efforts, recent reviews highlighted the need to understand better the effectiveness of adaptation strategies. How effective are they? If not, what can we do to make adaptations better? And if yes, how do we sustain them? But at the same time, to reduce present and future climate risks. So we are not only talking about present adaptation, but also present adaptation to future risks, or even preparation in anticipation of the risk in the future, as well as the limits and constraints to addressing climate change challenges. So we should have a better understanding of that, and our research collaboration has an important role to play towards that direction. The third point is advancing climate change adaptation in East and Southeast Asia requires collaborative action research. It requires empowering individuals, households, and institutions, and enhancing sharing and learning on climate change adaptation, as well as continuing capacity development, especially the younger generation. And my final point is Japan can really lead the way in advancing climate change adaptation in East and Southeast Asian regions, considering its high HDI, Human Development Index, its advances in science and technologies, and also the availability of capacity of committed professionals who can really lead in this region in terms of enhancing not only the present, but also the future generation. So with this, thank you very much for listening.
Hey, thank you very much, Professor Pulhan. And thank you very much also, and thank you very much for a message that encouraging us very much as a leader of this effort as Japan. Next, we'd like to move on to the and the authors of the publication is going to make one by one. And first of all, Professor Kotera is going to facilitate this part of the discussion, please. Okay, hello. I'm the coordinator of GLEC. From now on, I'd like to move on to the panel discussions. And so that's an authors of the book will all join for this panel discussion. And let me introduce. And would you please a mention message, just 1 minute for each. And this is, I'd like to go into the order of the chapter you have authored. First of all, from GLEC and Mr. Fuya, please. I have a message. Hello, do you hear me? Yes. Okay. I'm Furuya, and together with Yoshikawa-san, I'm Furuya. I was responsible for the chapter 4. And here in this book, and about the demand and supply model of the rice production, and this is matching that demand and supply and the production is mentioned. And now also we focusing on that the Mekong Delta and the Vietnam, and for revising that and the model, and with using that model, and we just to study about the climate change. And after this onward, I'd like to proceed with this and the joint research. Thank you very much. I highly appreciate all those who contribute this and also cooperate for the publication. Thank you very much.
So the next Indonesia University, Detri Bengheng. Unfortunately, she's not available today. Next, Ibaraki University, Yasuhara Sensei. The Global and Local Environment Co-Creation Institute of Ibaraki University. Thank you very much. I am Kazuya Yasuhara. So it was a sudden appointment. I was a little bit confused, but for the publication of the book, congratulations. And thank you very much for having the article. For creating the network is one of the themes. So through the network, I've been involved. So we would like to further expanding the network. It's really important. Because the participating countries' numbers are limited, so it is important to expand the network to other countries. And another thing is carbon neutrality. So how to adapt to climate change? Not only the adaptation, the countermeasures, but we have to think about the mitigation, the process. But until now, adaptation is adaptation, mitigation is mitigation. So the two countermeasures are separated. But in terms of the project, we have to merge the adaptation and also mitigation. How to apply the technology to formulate this mitigation. It is really difficult, but it's important at the same time. This is what I think. Thank you very much. This is my message. Thank you. Next. So at the time of the writing the articles, so Vietnam Japan universities went by the Tucson. Are you there? Could you give us some comment?
Good morning, Kotea. I'm sorry. Good afternoon, Kotea Sensei, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nguyễn Hoài Thu. Previously, I were a student of the Vietnam Japan University, and now I'm working at the Central Institute for Natural Resources and Environment Study. And Nice to meet all you guys. Yeah. And this is Anne. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Next, Toyo Eiwa University's Ms. Aiko Sakurai, would you give us a few words? Professor Sakurai, are you there? Sorry, next person. From Vietnam Institute of Economics. Tonti Michi Sensei, if you please.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So thank you very much for giving me the chance to participate in the book. And yeah, I'm glad to introduce myself again. I'm Tonti Michi from Vietnam Institute of Economics. And my major background is also the focus on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. And I am the leading author for the chapter 9 on the implementation of disaster risk reduction within 1 decade from 2010 to 2020. So thank you very much.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, Tonti Michi Sensei. Vietnam Japan University, the climate change, the program, Gwen Quan San, if you please. Professor Kwan, are you there?
Is it me?
Are you there? Sorry, Dr. Nguyễn Văn Quang, Vietnam Japan University. Okay, sorry. So, ではそれでは続きいきます。
Next. Sorry, from Indonesia, Oil Palm Research Institute. Shanas Desta Oktarina-san, if you please.
Konnichiwa, everyone. Thank you very much for the great opportunity. Let me introduce myself again. I am Sahnas Oktarina from IOPRI, Indonesia. I would like to send my gratitude for the GLEC committee that has been working so hard for this publication. And I feel happy that I can collaborate with the team and I can become one of the writers of the book. I contribute to the piece of research in the book with titled Stakeholder Perception and Empirical Evidence, Oil Palm Biomass Utilization as Climate Smart Smallholder Practice. The article talked about the oil palm biomass potential that can be used for income generating activities as well as the climate smart practice for smallholder in Indonesia. Various biomass technology is available. However, not many can decide which one is appropriate. Through this research, we also try to decipher stakeholder perceptions and challenge about this practice. If you consider to know more detail about this study area, please enjoy reading this book. And last but not least, I hope and look forward to future collaborative work again in the coming years with GLEC. Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much. Next person from Thailand, Phuket Rajabhat Universities. Skanya Pantanabun Sensei, if you please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sukanya Wongthanaboon, but you can call my nickname Phon. It means rain. I'm now working as a lecturer in Environmental Science Department, Faculty of Science and Technology, Phuket Rajabhat University. I'm interested in the field of hydrology, water resources management, watershed management, and environmental modeling. I would like to thank you very much to give me the opportunity to write the column in the book. My column is about water resource assessment and management in Phuket, Thailand. It gives the information about rainfall, groundwater, surface water, and water resource management. Thank you very much.
はい、ありがとうございます。続きまして、
Thank you very much. Next. So I'd like to introduce three people from the Ibaraki the universities, Mr. Tamura, and thank you very much. I'm Tamura. Thank you very much for gathering. I'm really appreciative. So right now, this book's draft was delivered. And we are now in the phase of the final editing. So it'll take us 2 or 3 more weeks. And within 2 or 3 weeks, this book would be published. As I mentioned before that, the 35 people were involved in a 10 chapter and 9 columns. So there's so many people are involved in writing these books. And I would like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to all of the authors. And if you are interested in the books, I hope you read these books, and thank you very much for your cooperation. Thank you very much. Next, thank you very much for the presentation. John Griffin Sensei, if you please.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon once again. It has always been a pleasure to be part of this group. So the last 3 years has been really very enriching for all of us. And on behalf of the Philippine team from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, we'd like to thank the network for the opportunity of collaborating on this particular book. The title of our chapter is Participatory Climate Change Adaptation Using Watershed Approach, Processes and Lessons from the Philippines. So we actually, through this chapter, draw some sort of what we call as a participatory protocol, but at the same time try to focus on community-based adaptation and how the different stakeholders can also facilitate or help adaptation at the local level. So we highlighted also the importance of universities, like most of us, as catalysts for integrating science and local knowledge. So again, thank you so much, and I look forward to more years of collaboration. And even before the first book is out, I'm looking forward to the second, third, and even probably fourth book that this group can work together on, as well as some joint journal article publication. So thank you so much again.
はい、ありがとうございます。それでは
Thank you very much. Last of all, I'd like to invite from the Ibaraki Universities and Professor Ito, please. Okay. Ishikawa-san should speak first before me. Okay. Okay, the Professor Ishikawa, please. Okay. I was responsible for chapter 4 and also for the editing of the book. My name is Ishikawa of Ibaraki University. I joined this group of authors in the middle of the work, so that and actually almost I could not have the opportunity to just meet the authors in person, and most of the communication was done only by the emails. And I'm really happy to join all of the authors today, and also for some of the authors could not join and today, by the way, and also for and we have the encouraging message from Dr. Pulfin, and so that we'd like to get together with this in the groups and authors and having the additional communication, so that we're getting into the explore the new frontiers together. Thank you very much for today. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, then again. Okay, and in total 35 authors are now coordinated by the professor, the Ito of Ibaraki University, and he was served as the coordinator. Thank you very much. Okay, hello. First of all, I'd like to show my heartfelt thanks to all of the people who are involved in the authors, and as well as the editing process of these publications, Tamura-san, or the Professor Tamura, Professor Ishikawa, and also the Kotera-san has worked a lot to help me for editing and finally come to the final publications. So we have 4 are mentioned as the editors, but I'd like to just appreciate all of these other co-editors. And writing a book, I just also wrote a lot of books in the past, but when I tried to, what shall I say, and it's the publishing a book is really a big deal, and it will be but on the other hand, now we are now living in this internet era. And we'll also have to come up with not only for the book publication, but also we have the other different tools and environments, so we can do a lot more. And I'm really convinced myself personally in this international workshop and also this symposium, now going boundary of the countries and regions, and also we're going to really have the interdisciplinary efforts, and also, and we are just talking about going beyond the even generations, and we can get together and to the united. And I thank you very much. And now we are in really in the crisis and the climate change, or the COVID-19 pandemic. That's hard, and all that's and the really serious problem we have to face up against, and we cannot just do it by ourselves alone, but we have to just have a network. We have to work together and united together for all the people. And I'm really convinced it again today. So one of that's the networks, specific network in which we can just work like way, and also like to move on this network. And also, I suppose there are a lot of similar networks in the global basis. So that's if we can have just and all this connected these different networks, and we can have the inter-networks. So that's why we need to connect with these other networks together. It will be our next task, but it will be a big deal. But anyway, and also that's the direction we have to go, I think. Okay, so I think that's including myself, that and have to do my utmost so that I like to continue this and efforts of the networking, and also like to do our utmost. Thank you very much again. Thank you. And may I keep saying? Okay. Okay, then. Okay, please move on to the panel discussion, please. Okay. Okay, then I'd like to move on to the panel discussion. And first of all, I'd like someone will speak fast. And now the Professors Tamulan, Professor Pulifin, and make some specific comments, so that I'd like to just open the floor to the question as well, as well as comments. And then also, if there are any additional comments to that, and any authors' comments we already have, and I'd like to welcome and invite and from panelists. Anyone? Any comments? Would you please speak up? Would you please just release your mute button if you speak up, please? This is Yasuhara speaking. Kodera-san, may I? Okay. It's not my just comment, but we need to have some kinds of specific and we need to focus on specific topic before asking for the comments, because that's the subjects are too broad. For example, the Professor Ito mentioned that there are a lot of the different networks in the other parts of the world, and how we can connect to this network with each other. So this means that we tried to do that once in the past, but and it was really hard to do that. And it was 15 years ago, I experienced myself that although there are the network of the networks. I mean that there are a lot of networks, but how we can reach and connect that network with each other, so that the network of the networks. And this is the initiative I tried to implement, but it was really hard. And now many of you have already worked with me, but it turned out to be quite a difficult task, but still. And we needed to realization of that kind of the wider and the grand network always in our mind. So, and when we have the network, but we have the connected network of all these, and we can expand the network. Then we can achieve one by one, and that tends to be really favorable for us. And the future activities, I'm sorry, it's not any many details or specific plan, but I hope that this is kind of a food of thoughts for you to continue discussion. I think network is a really important keyword, and also keyword for these publications, and also a presentation from the Professor Ploufin and Professor Tamara mentioned also the importance of network, and also then the workshop network was mentioned, and for example, that not only for inter-community, but also intergeneration, and intergeneration network is there that we have to establish. So then let me just deep dive to and discuss more deeply about the details more about this network. Do you have any comments about this network topic of networks? For example, if that's your own, that's responsible chapter, and is there anyone who discuss about network in there when you're writing the book? And would you please make a comment, please?
In addition to that, so the participants can also talk, and please share your thoughts on chat box. Please type up your opinion on chat box. So can I say a few words? Yasara-sensei, thank you very much for raising the problem. Networks of network and how to maintain the network is very easy to say, but materialize these things is really hard. So in the Morishita Sensei's the presentation, so there's a topic of the adaptation of the Asia-Pacific regions. AP Plat adaptation, the platform network, we are making a proposal, but APN, APAC. So from the administration level, we are giving the proposal for the networking. In addition to that, we are focusing on the researchers. For example, the student and so creating the network on the researcher base and creating a network on the administrative base. It's okay, but the thing is, in order to maintain this network, we have to organize the structures for the responsibility. Maybe not one person, but the several people should be involved, not only linked with each other, but we have to roll up the sleeves and work. So institutionalizing network is also really important. So in Japan, so there is so-called the local the adaptation center was established. So this is one of the activities. So my impression is that so we have to tackle with the problem on the institution base, and also we have to see things from a grassroots perspective. And the networking, which will be naturally occurred. So these elements are one of the keys. This is my personal observation. Thank you very much. Other participants, other senseis, other professors? Okay, maybe it'll take time for typing up the thoughts. Okay, so I'd like to talk over. The title of the book is the Interlocal, the network creating. Who would be the target readers? The reason why I'm asking this question is that because we are discussing the networking, the network. The person who have the book, who read the book, would be part of our network. This is our expectation, my expectation. So again, I would like to ask you, who is the target leaders of this book? I think this is a good opportunity for building the network. Okay, maybe I'm not sure that I'm the suitable person to answer the question, but the people who are addressing the problem at the moment is that the reason why we wrote the book in English is that because the implementation in a global base of the adaptation is really important. So there are various kinds of stakeholders, researchers, administrative people, and also the general public. So these are the target people. And of course, I'm a university the person. The college students and university students are also the target of the leaders. I think even the high school students can read this book. So again, so the reason is that the book is written in English, not in Japanese. And this book would be accessible, I mean, the open access. So I indicated so-called the sufficient model. So the policymakers, what kind of the policy will influence what? For example, the climate change. For example, if let's reduce the so-called species which can endure the heat, the problem, and I hope that somebody will create the simulation and how many people would be benefited of the heat-resistant the species of the plant. So when it comes to the institutions, it's really important. It's also one of the key factors, which is also connected with the networking and which is also connected with the policy making. So institution, the rules, how we create the rules and institutions. And how to collaborate with the local administrators, local government people. So this would be one of the outcomes of this, I think, the book's networks. Thank you very much for the comment. Professor Yasuhara, then you're back. So one of the target leaders was the policy maker that managed the relative leaders. Yes, of course, they're very important, but rather than that, private companies people would be one of our target leaders. I hope the private companies people will read this book. And from this perspective, I think the Japanese version of this book would also be necessary. So because I am in the engineering, the soil the base engineering, which will be focusing on a narrow field. So there is a question and there's a proposal. The major companies, the enterprises can cope up with the problem pretty quickly, but when it comes to the small the scale companies, the small and medium-sized the companies, so they're not sure about that. Maybe they will wonder what kind of attitudes they should take. In addition to that, so with our technology, what can we do? So if there is a shortage, if there is lacking in something, we have to fill up the gap. And then we can come up with the solution. So I think reading this book would be a good opportunity to think about that, to realize the needs, the way of thinking, the mindset, and through this process, we can reach to the solution, a good solution. Not only the policymakers, not only the administrators, but I hope this book can be read to the private companies people. That's what we hope.
So for those people in the private sectors can understand the actual needs they have to deal with, and this is what I think about it the most in these days. But anyway, if they can be aware of that, and it would be a meet and actually are just objective of the book. But this is what I expect about this book publication. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, may I? So now, also for that, many of the messages to that, a lot of messages to that the students and policymakers or the younger generations, and I think that's each of this author think about the target audience of this book. So it's so diversified. But I'd like to ask you to the Tusan, and I'd like to ask the comments from the younger generations, and what do you think about this? And are there any comments from the younger people and the students? Do I have any comments? Okay. So, Tun-san. So this is just from the request from the Professor Ishikawa. Are there?
Oh, hi. It's me. I can't hear you. To be honest, as a young researcher, it's an honor for me to take part in this book. And to my experts, I really hope that very good like this will give a strong future.
Tun-kun, sorry to interrupt. Your voice is too small. So can you speak louder, or can you change your setting of the volume?
Oh, sorry. I will try to speak louder.
Thank you.
Yes, I I mean that I really hope that the network like this, like our, will become stronger and bigger in the future, and to have the better mitigation and adaptation measures. I think that the applications like this will it's just the first publication, but I think if we can continue and take more effort, I think the impact will be bigger in the future. And I really hope that there will be more participation from other countries like China or Thailand or other members in this region. So we'll have more effects, more impact in the future. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you very much. Okay, and our internet connection was not that good, but anyway, thank you very much. Tucson? Tucson, do you have any comments about the network, for example? Do you have any comments? Tucson, going for Tucson, and who would be the reader? To whom did you write a book? Who read it? Yeah, what is that the target audience and the readers of the book? To whom did you write the book to?
Can you hear it? Can you hear me? Yeah. Can you translate the question into English, please?
Okay. You can change the English. You can change to English. So can you see that the bottom of the Zoom window? So you can change the language.
Zoom window.
The interpretation.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I got it.
Hi.
Okay. Tucson, now you wrote a book, and who would be the target audience and reader of your book? This is the question. Does it make sense to you? To whom would you like you to read your book? Or what is your ideal network? It would be, you think? What kind of network would be the ideal in your idea?
Sorry, can you repeat the question once again?
What is the purpose of who do you want to read for your article? What is the main reader of your article? Yes. And how to develop the network, or how to develop the network of the climate change adaptation. Do you have any ideas of that?
Okay, so thank you for your question. The first one is the network, the workshop. For two questions, can I think one again and I will answer it later, maybe my 5 minutes? It's okay?
So yeah, We are already behind the schedule a little bit. So can you say something?
はい。その間に、
Yeah.
はい。その間に他の
Okay, then, while she's thinking about the answers, I'd like to ask to the other participants. We're now getting close to that the time that we have to summarize the session. Okay. From Professor Ito, would you please just summarize the session? And also, I have some personal requests to Professor Tamura. Now, now you mentioned about now the publication is delivered, right, Springer? Would you please show that actual the book to the camera now? This is a very good opportunity. Would you please show that the book? Okay, okay, okay. For my target readership is that I think that's the young students. This should be the major reader, but now today and a lot of the authors are not. I'm just, I'm aware today that each author have its own ideas about who should be that's a target leader. But anyway, that's good. So this is a good opportunity to expand that's the scope of the work and the network, and it's a very good thing. And for the network, so some institutional network, but at the same time, there's some personal network or grassroots network, and there will be just bridging each person to person. Not so much institutional, but it's also the network, and I think that the institutional network is very important. But on the other hand, I'm going toward the idea about more the grassroots type of the connectivity or the network is more important, I think. I'm also working on that exactly. That's how to build up that kind of a grassroots network. But I think that getting all the more powerful, I hope that. And for example, it's very difficult. I suppose that the individual citizen can have the impact on the government policy. But I think, I'm convinced that if we have that kind of a connection between these individuals who can be empowered to move the policy of the government. I'm 57 years old, and now we're going to retire at 2030 at the target year, but now we're getting older now. But after this onward, I think that now I also have to get engaged in that the building up the institutional network, but rather I'd like to more emphasis on that building up that grassroots type of the network, and so that the younger people can expand that, for example, Tucson or Tucson or that. I think that's I'd like to support that all those younger people we do. I'd like to support for them and in the network. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Tucson, are you ready to say something? So finally, could you give us a few words?
Okay, so thank you, Ito Sensei, for sharing. I'm totally agree with you that the purpose of the research can like change our mind, our young student, young generation. And I think that when the research is will like raise awareness of the people surrounding me, such as a student, and maybe it can spear in a member of the family, like my family, and this will contribute positive in the adaptation to climate change and make it better. I think so. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. So I think So we would like to close the panel discussion. We're running out of time. So the dear panelists, thank you very much for the participant, and the audience, dear audience, thank you very much for participating. So we would like to move on to the closing. So Professor Ishikawa, if you please. Thank you very much for gathering despite your busy schedule. And I really appreciate that we created the wonderful symposium. So we would like to, let's see, close the book publication, the Climate Change Adaptation book publication commemorative symposium. Thank you very much for participating in the symposium.